Hey, what's up, comrades? Hope everyone's doing great. We're here to talk about the Berlin Apartment, which is a game that was suggested to me, specifically me, by Fit Girl. So Fit Girl is the queen of the internet as far as I'm concerned. She's doing God's work, more so than most religious pastors are doing. And she's a saint. So she has this little pink paw thing she puts on games that are like highly recommended, and I'm almost positive that this is one of those games. Otherwise, I don't think I would have downloaded it because it looks goofy as shit. Like the animation and art style is pretty awful, I want to say. Not awful in like a, old school way or just like low res or any of that stuff. Awful is in like... I've heard the term Cal art style bandied around, and when people I'm like, what is that? And it's like Steven Universe, and I look at that and I'm like, ugh, gross. Okay, I see why people dislike this. Like no sane human being thinks that's a good way to communicate anything across the board, right? It's kind of like modern art. Like everyone understands modern art is garbage and stupid, but like people like to feel superior to other people, and so they pretend to like this thing that no normal person would like because they're better than you, right? That's this Cal art style as far as I'm concerned. This is not that bad, right? It's not a Cal art style, but it is like so bright and not well detailed, and it's just... I feel like maybe if you used this art style and made like a better game, maybe I would be more forgiving, but everything just looks bad. It looks very washed out as far as I'm concerned. Maybe washed out's not the right term. My English is not always the best. It just all looks very plain and samey, and like I'm very uninterested in what's going on visually, right? But I'm like, okay, well, Fit Girl is the queen, so let's see what we got here. So the story of the game is also boring and awful, and then the gameplay in the game is a trudge to get through because there's essentially five stories if you're counting like the overarching like plot story thingy. There's like a movie term for this. The plot hook, not hook. There's a thing that is occurring, and then all the stories take place within that narrative. And so the overarching theme is there's this guy with his daughter's off school for a week, and he is like a repairman or something. So he's fixing up an old apartment in Berlin. And then while he's like fixing it up, so it can be resold or rented or whatever, his daughter is like hanging out with him because she's off school and has nothing better to do. And at first she's like super upset about the whole situation. And then she, kind of has a good time, like painting walls and like tearing wallpaper off and smashing tile and like doing other like quirky things in the game that have no purpose and no point necessarily. They do have a little bit, like a point you have to like smash tiles, it'll like lead to the next story or like stuff like that. You're like digging up like an old furnace or something, and you find like this star that leads to one of the stories, stuff like that. And then, the game takes place over like the course of that week. So like every couple of days they're hearing this thing and something happens and she asks a question about it. And then the old man tells like a story about it. And it seems like the stories are all just bullshit that he made up. Because, and I say that because during the fourth story, he's like, I'm tired of telling stories. How about you're in second grade, you tell me a story. And then we play through that story, and that story was the worst, which is, you should never let kids be in charge of anything. Like, kids are stupid. They aren't very good at things. You got to really like guide them and teach them. That's the whole point of being a child, is to like learn and grow, and not like you obviously know nothing. And then you can take some like wackadoo stuff that children say or do and make something out of it. But like, I've decided one of the things I want to do with my daughter, for example, is to make like a game in like RPG Maker, because she has shown like interest in like games somewhat, like video games. And then she likes creating things, right? And she likes telling stories. And so I'm like, oh, we can just do this thing together, and that will like get her, noggin jogging. And sometimes she'll like say stuff, and I'm like, no, we're not going to do that. That's ridiculous. Like, you don't just give like children free range. That's retarded. Anyway. Okay, so that's that. And then like, it starts off and the apartment's like a disaster. Like there's like broken walls and like garbage everywhere. And then you leave, and the guy is, I gotta give him props. He's very competent in his job. The apartment looks nice, super nice when they leave at the end. And then during the story, she's keeping like a time capsule, like the little girl. And then they leave it like under there's like the doormat area, like under the wood or whatever. They like leave the time capsule, and maybe someone will find it and make up their own stories or whatever. And the stories are kind of rooted in reality, it seems, a tiny little bit, because they find like stuff in the apartment, and so that kind of roots the storytelling. All right, and then we essentially just go back in time, and so it's a bunch of like anti-socialist stuff, which good. Because we're in East Berlin, yeah. So we're in East Berlin, and it's like we're right. The apartment's like right on the border of where the wall was. So the first story is about some guy who was a botanist, and he's kind of a loser, and he had a roommate, and the roommate's like, I'm gonna get the fuck out of here, you should come. And then he was like, nah bro, I'm gonna stay here and do flowers stuff. And then he regrets it, sort of. And so he's just kind of bored and hanging out, not doing anything, and being kind of like a sadapotamus. And then he gets like a paper airplane, and the paper airplane's from like this chick, Lou, I think is her name, from like across the wall. And she was like spying on him and is like, you look bored, you should call me. And so he tries calling, but then like socialism happens and they can't make the phone call go through. Which is, this part's actually decent story writing, despite the story being boring and I have no interest in it. Because he makes this call and then they're like, oh, we'll call you back when we can make the connection. And he's like, socialism, the worst thing ever, blah, blah, blah. So he makes paper airplanes and they share messages back and forth. And so the mini game is to get like the paper airplane to the other side. And it's super easy, except for the last time when you have to fail. And so they just like chat and they're very flirty with each other. And we see like all his goulash and like Soylent soup and crap that he has to like make. And they decide they're going to have like a little dinner date. And then, from like their separate apartments or whatever. And we never see this chick, but this guy's kind of like, he's like a redheaded nerd. He kind of looks like Napoleon Dynamite, like the main character in that. I don't know. I've never seen the movie. I assume that's the main character, the one that's on the movies and stuff, the Mormon guy. Anyway, so then, at the end, the call goes through and they chat and they like have a wonderful evening together. And then the old man is like, and a year later the wall came down and they ended up being together, and maybe they're still together, who knows. Shut up and let me do my work. And then like a couple days later, the girl finds, what's the next one she finds? Oh yeah, she finds like a star. Yeah. She finds a star in the fireplace, like this wooden star, and she's like, Papa, what's this all about? And he tells this like sad story about this family after like World War II in Germany, and their whole house is like they're in this tiny room in this big apartment area because like the whole rest of the apartment's been like bombed the shit out of, and it's like winter time, so it's cold, so they got to hide out here. And then her whole thing is she just like puts trinkets around the room. They talk about her father, who's obviously never coming back, who was in the war, and like, did he kill people, and if I miss Papa. And the mom's like, shut the fuck up. And come have like turnip soup, and they got like, we see like this is the best story because it's like you just like brighten the room, and you have like, there's like, you play as this little girl, and then you got a brother, and then there's the mom, and then eventually you're allowed to go to like the locked part of the apartment to find some stuff for like the Christmas tree, and you find your dad's old medals and some bullets and like an old gun and stuff like that. So it's like very profound, I guess. And it's like, the horrors of war, you can't escape it. And then right after, obviously like immediately after the war, virtually, it's like the Soviets took over and like closed off the road. And so now it's like, not only did you're suffering after this like awful war, and they lost your husband, but now you got to deal with socialism, and it's like, kill me now. Guys, it was really dark. And then so then the third story was kind of boring. It was about this Jewish guy. It's very important because remember, Germany, Jewish, before the war, like in the 1930s, and he was like a wage slave, and then he like found like an old theater, like a movie theater. Oh no, it was an old theater, just a regular theater that had like gone up for sale for like super cheap. And so he quit his job and bought the theater and turned it into a movie theater, and he loved movies, and his whole life was like movies. And now he's like an old man, and his like, I don't know, some lady named Esther, which is like, hey, he's Jewish, in case you're retarded. It's like, hey, I'm going to come pick you up. There's no like, I'm going to come pick you up with grandpa or uncle or dad. So it's very ambiguous, which I don't know why they did that. That's kind of weird. So this random lady is just going to like get you to France. And so you got to like collect all your stuff, and you're like hobbling around. And then the whole time you're learning about like his theater got destroyed because he was Jewish, and Das Juden and all that crap. And then he makes it Oh, then like right as you're about to like leave, the Stasi like show up, and they're like, Herr Finkelmeyer or whatever his name was. Your neighbor complained about you making noise, and obviously she just complained about him making noise because he's Jewish and wants to get him in trouble, and so he has to like escape out the back door very like slowly before they break through, and then like he made it, and he made it to France, and eventually he made it to America and went to Hollywood and like loved his life, and so good job, the old Kraut. And then again, like the first three stories are like the first story was boring and long. The second story was pretty decent, mostly because it was short and it was like it showed not told. And then the Jewish story was kind of drawn out, but it was interesting. Like I was fine with it, right? And then this last story is just like, God, it's so awful. It's like in the 1960s, I want to say, and it's a little girl telling the story, so it's like a lot of it doesn't make any sense. But the gist of it is there's this girl who is like writing novels for like the party or whatever, and so she's under like the Bureau of Entertainment Justification or something. I don't know, some awful sounding Soviet name. And so she's trying to write like a science fiction novel, but then, you know, she keeps getting like calls from like her editor that are like, hey, the Bureau of Land Management wants like more worker representation or more glories of socialism in your book. And she keeps having to like make, you know, she's like, oh, what's the core of the story? I'm trying to write a story, but like I got to keep changing all these things, and like what's most important, the core of the story. And then you find out like her dad's an author as well that works for like the Soviets, and that he always like towed the line. And so at some point they're like, hey, we're gonna get your dad in here to like help like rework your stuff, because he's easier to work with because you're like some crazy woman and we don't like the way you're sassing us. And then you have to make like a decision at the end of the story about whether you're going to let your dad do the story and you're going to keep the core like anti-socialist propaganda in there, because they'll kind of like they'll like, yeah, that's good enough because they trust your dad more than you, or you're going to like keep your name on it but you got to sell out completely. And I thought I was going to do the thing where I was going to let my dad put his name on it, because he calls at some point and is like, hey, it's your choice, like I'll do this, or you can just push it on your own, but you're going to have to, they're not going to publish it unless you do all this stuff. But then it seemed like I chose the other thing by accident, and I was like, this is such a poorly designed part of the game, because I should not, like, I'm not like a child who can barely read. Like, it should be pretty straightforward, like what I'm supposed to be doing here. But it was like very ambiguous at some point, and I was like, I think this is what I want to do. And then it was not, it was the thing I did not want to do. And it doesn't matter, because it's just like, this game's essentially like a glorified walking simulator. And so, and then, yep, there you go. The worst part about this part, the reason like, honestly, I would have been like, yeah, the game's fine, until this part happened, because you have to like type a lot. And when I say type, you literally have to type on the keyboard, or like I was using a controller at first, but then I moved to the keyboard because it was like you have to hit like the X button, like you have to hit, and every time you hit it types one letter. And it's not like you're actually typing, right? You're just like you're going through the motions of like typing, and then it's still writing like whatever the game is already pre-programmed to write out. And then you have like these choices, but the choices don't make sense, and sometimes they're highlighted and sometimes they're not. And I'm like, I feel like there's a lot more going on here that I'm unaware of. But the game just like proceeds forward no matter what you do, and it didn't seem to affect anything. So I was just kind of like, what is the point of this? Like, why? And it dragged out. And then there was a part, it's because your daughter's telling the story, you keep going from like this apartment to like a spaceship, and then at some point she's like, I need coffee, and then you go on this exceedingly long, like slow moving walk through this space station, this huge space station with all these twists and turns. And it was like, I mean, I make it sound worse than it actually was, but it felt awful. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Like, why? This is so unfun. And that's the thing. It just was like, I couldn't wait till it was over. And then when it was over, you still had this little like end of like the main story where the girl puts like a blue crayon in there as like her gift to like the future or whatever. And I'm like, this is the worst time capsule I have ever seen in my entire life. That's the Berlin apartment. That's a huge thumbs down. I immediately deleted it, not only off my computer, but off my server. My children and my future descendants who inherit my massive library of things never need to like imagine playing this game. Like, was it one of the worst things ever? No. Will I ever think about this game again? Most likely not. Unless this year is filled with the most stupendous things in the whole world. Like, I am just like, week after week, just like amazed by how great. Like, there's nothing else this year that I like do not. So yeah, there you go. So go ahead. hard pass. Go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment, and I will catch you guys next time. All right. Adios.